All right, so I'm Nicole Coulter. We are here. There's a few of us from the sort of learning experiences thread. Also, I think all members of LARC, I hope at least, because that's where a lot of educators have congregated so far. And we got together today to talk a little bit about unschooling, homeschooling and unschooling. And I'm going to start off by just kind of explaining a little bit about my connection to that topic in terms of, and I guess I'll say that I want to make room for people to tell the story in a little bit of detail. So I'm kind of going to try and I'm going to give myself maybe 5 minutes. I'm not doing like a 1 minute quick. So I have 3 children. The youngest one is, the older 2 had their own different ways that they struggle, but the youngest one just struggled in so many ways that went, by high school, she went to 3 different, well, she was at her second high school and said, I do not want to go back there. And a friend of mine said, you should homeschool. And at that time, I was I worked from home, running a magazine. My husband had his own business too. We were a completely self-employed family, and there was no way that I could see how homeschooling would fit in my life. And so I just rejected it without really digging in. And I did dig in enough to discover that unschooling was a concept that resonated with me. But again, I was still like, that's not me. I can't do that. And luckily, she found a high school called a middle college in this area, which allows her to go to college classes. And even though she did have a lot of learning challenges, there were just a 60-person school. So it did work for her, and she graduated. But after she graduated is when I started and decided to go to the International Center for Studies in Creativity, which is, I didn't realize what I was getting myself into. It was like a big leap, which we do a lot in these Akimbo West type people do a lot of leaping. And on my way there, I was listening to Sir Ken Robinson's book, Creative Schools. And he mentioned the North Star model. And I arrived on campus and I could almost think of nothing else but this concept of self-directed education, and that there could be learning communities where kids did not have to follow this rigid curriculum, and they didn't have to, be told or coerced into what to do. Hi, Cassandra.
Hi, Cassandra.
Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome. We're glad you're here. So we did start recording, so I just want to make sure you're okay with that, so that other people who couldn't make it could watch, and then you'll get to hear the beginning of what you didn't hear so far. Is that okay?
That's fine. They can see my wet hair too. So
That's okay. That's okay. I like it. It's the look. So I think I was at discovering the North Star model. And so I basically thought about not even finishing my master's, because I was just wanting to like create one of these communities for teens. And I'm glad I did finish my master's, because it allowed me to really understand creativity on a deep level. But I used everything in there is much like this, where you're driving towards what change are you going to make in the world. And so I got to do lots of projects on self-directed education, interview projects, conceptualizing a community that would use entrepreneurship to fund the community instead of being tuition-based. Like, I got to do it all. And that, really helped build a trust in me that I didn't have at the time when I first, as a parent, had to make the choice. So like, basically I realized that I was confronting, how could I become a person that people could trust to say, I didn't do it, but I regret that, and I really believe you should. So that is where I am now. And that journey, that Ken Robinson book, was 2015 when I started my master's. We're now 5 years later, and now we have this pandemic where the world is just, everybody wants to talk about homeschooling. Everybody wants to think about, and I don't want to focus on what we don't like about the current system, or what we don't what we're rejecting. It's more about, it opens the space to really imagine what's possible when you realize that you had the power all along you were always your children's first educator. In the rest of their adult lives, you will be their trusted advisor. And when you outsource your child's education to the school system for 12 plus years, there's a cost to that for your child that I don't think people weigh as heavily, because they never questioned whether or not there could be something different. And so that's what I'm about, is just, we're now questioning that there could be something different. And I think we're all, or at least some of us, there are people who are trying to create something in this moment in time. And that's where I am. And that's what kept me up last night, because everything about what I'm going to create and how it would exactly look was just dropping even more. So I'll turn over to whoever would want to go next. And you could build upon what I said if you connect to any of it, but I want to hear your stories. So I don't know, Sophie, I know was if I could choose one person, I would choose Sophie, because I know that you kind of started the first mention of it in the thread, and it was because of your daughter. So I guess I'd like to hear the backstory on that.
Great. So it's a great and long and beautiful story that has not ended, because she's only 25, but it ended really well in the concept that we're discussing here. Sir Ken Robinson was a major part of my journey. I had the incredible joy and luck and honor to meet him and work with him. And it's from a conversation I had with him, which, by the way, screwed me for the rest of life, because I can't have a conversation with anyone now and find it remotely interesting. It's very painful. But I had a conversation with him that he had unschooled his daughter, who was very successfully finding her way and struggling with it, but very much in the path of, what is this? What could it be? And so I took the leap pretty much, I think, that night of the conversation I had with him. So I definitely credit him for the inch that kind of kept me from doing it before I talked to him. So her story is interesting because she wasn't struggling at all. She was extremely academic, actually, and she was praised for being academic a lot. And that was scaring me, because they would say things like, she could be a doctor. And I'd be like, well, does she want to be a doctor? It was more about, look at how this little monkey can perform. And it was also very, very creative. And I could see that she was starting to turn off the light on her creativity so she could, perform and get the praise and be the whatever of the class. And so it was and I sometimes, guilt is not my mode of operation, but there's definitely a little bit of some people. One of my friends, their daughter would vomit every morning before going to school, and the stress and the anxiety and the social scene was so difficult. And she really had a learning disability that wasn't diagnosed for the longest time, because there wasn't the usual, symptoms or whatever. And so mine, it was just more like I'm turning this child into a performing circus monkey, and it was a horrible thing to see. And so I had a conversation with a friend of mine, who had unschooled two of his sons, and one before that had never gone. Well, one had gone to school and it didn't go well, and he unschooled him. And the two never went to school at all. He just started from the beginning to unschool them. So yes, unschooling is super different than homeschooling, because homeschooling, you basically follow a curriculum and you're still putting the authority on, I know, you don't know, to the child, and very, very different. So my daughter took her education into her own hands, is how she called it. She was very much she went into her room for hours and drew this PowerPoint that was going to be what she was going to do and why she was going to do it and what she was going to say when people say, you're ruining whatever. My father said, you're making your child into a homeless person. And I was like, you didn't go to school that long. My brother almost died of going to school. At least I'm trying something else, So the conversations that I'm sure, Nicole, I don't know your stories, Cassandra and Louise, but at least the people were the problem. The people around me, the comments, the parents, the ones that were scared to do it, that tried to pull me back, the ones that didn't have the time and made me feel guilty that somehow I figured it out. I was working. I mean, you know, I wasn't super wealthy. It wasn't like I magically did it. I was just super committed. And so I think specific questions would help if you have. I mean, maybe we can go around to the other one. She's now 25. She chose at 18, I think, when her friends from her previous school decided to go to college. She kind of got the hit of like, I really want to go. I want to learn, because she's a learner. She didn't lose her learning joy. She was 14 when she left school. So for 4 years, she was completely autonomous. And when I say autonomous, I'm not joking. It was very much like some days I would leave for work and I would be like, what are you doing today? And she'd say, I don't know. And I'd be like, okay, well, you'll let me know tonight. And she sometimes stayed in bed all day, and that was okay, you know? And so a lot of parents I know were struggling with, at least if they go to school, they have, you know, 8 hours a day where they're going to be doing something. Forget the fact that they're doing something that's completely irrelevant. School stopped growing 100 years ago. Our kids go to garage bands, they create videos and shit all day. And then they have to go sit with some dusty, musty person, and they have to listen to shit they don't care about, which they can literally look at their phone, and their phone can tell them in order alphabetically of all the states. They don't need to learn that by heart. It's like, there's so much about all that. So at 18, she decided she wanted to go to school. I said, where do you want to go? She said, NYU. And I said, okay, well, that's not exactly, you know, the college next door that we can figure it out how to do it. And she was like, I called them. It doesn't matter that there's no grades. I need to prove that I did something interesting. I'm going to write an essay. And I said, do you want to pick other colleges? In case she was like, no, I want to go to NYU. And I was like, okay. And she wrote an essay, which turned out years later, she never showed it to me at the time, but years later, that it was about me and the leap that we took together and the story of that led to, and this incredible, and the difficult side of it. There was a lot of also, you know, trusting her so much that she had to swim without really knowing how to. And some of that was really difficult. And so it was sobering as well, you know, but also, can we ever do anything perfectly? You know, if she had stayed in school, she would have been miserable about that. So, but it was very sobering for me to hear. But she did get into NYU with almost all funded. It was incredible. And she's now a great story because, you know, it was all about her own choices and her own following her own direction, as you described. And I'm not in the scene anymore because it's been, you know, 10 years. So I don't know what's been happening. I can tell you that 10 years ago, I was very alone. There was one woman who had started a bus when her kid was young that picked up a bunch of kids, and every day the kids would decide what they do with the bus. And so one kid was really into museums, and so one day they would go to a museum, and one kid was into parks and nature, and so they would all go to the park. And literally every kid was put in charge of, what do we do for the day? And they were 9 or 12, whatever they were. So I remember meeting with her on a regular basis and just being so refueled. You have to have a source of fuel, because otherwise, I mean, for me, it was just very depleting, you know, to come to the situation with like this. And her father was against it, so I had to, you know, do whatever that is. So yeah, it's a beautiful, long, complicated, and amazing story. That's kind of where it's at.
That's awesome. And I appreciate all the detail. And I love that we didn't plan that we would have that dramatic contrast in the fact that I didn't choose it, but why I was even considering it was because of the struggle. And to say that to anybody thinking about like, okay, well, that worked because this is what I could hear. That worked because your kid was so brilliant already. But that's not, you know, if I could line up story after story of people whose kid was shut down, self-harming, suicidal, vomiting every morning or whatever, and really struggling in school, straight Fs, and you take that kid out of that environment and you allow them to own their education, and because they have to own the rest of their lives, so why not start then and stop the damage, and they will be better off long term. No, I have no doubt anymore. I had doubts. I have no more doubts. So
I love that.
But
it was this idea sorry, you go.
No, go on. Yeah, it was this
I
idea.
was just it was this idea. I remember this conversation where I got in touch with, I don't want to be told for 8 hours a day what the fuck to do. And you know, those kids are being kept kids longer than we were. That's why girls have their period at 13. Boys used to work at 4. It's like, they're not kids when they're 20 years old, 18. They're not kids anymore. And that's why they're struggling so much, because they're being told what to do all day. Would you like that?
And
I
also,
wouldn't do a
that's
life of
not
that.
even relevant. You know, they're being, as you said, Nicole, it's all these kind of things that doesn't even actually relate to their lives.
Mm-hmm.
With filling them, we're basically trying to stuff information in them. And all the tests, it's like regurgitate what I told you last week. And this is completely, doesn't just fit society. This doesn't fit life anymore.
Yeah. So can I ask you, Louise, because I don't know, and this is why, like, because that's the starting place, is the frustration with what we currently have. But like, I want to make sure that the room that we're creating here is about imagining what we want to do to sort of be the change, instead of like really focusing on the problem. So because we all know that we could, yeah, that's, so why were you drawn to this conversation?
Because it's so different to what I do. Now that's kind of, I'm going to bring a completely different aspect into it.
Yep.
I've worked in education now for 25 years and have become increasingly sad about where things are not going right. And it was fascinating. I've been listening to lots of people talk about, I have one daughter, sorry, and she is in school in Germany. I live in Germany. And interestingly, we're not allowed to homeschool. Our kids have to go to school. We're not allowed to do anything at home. So I'm coming from a background where I can say, okay, this is the status quo at the moment, but what elements can we take? We have this school system. What elements can we take to try and make our current system better? We can't change it, but we can at least try and effect change from within. And what's been really interesting is listening to people talk about how they've kind of been coping in the crisis. And a lot of people who said that they started off by thinking, oh my God, I've got to get this curriculum. You know, my kid's going to be at home. I have to get the curriculum, and I have to keep going through the maths and the stuff with them so that they don't fall behind. And they've kind of, like, so many of them have said, and then after a few days, we just threw that out the window and we went in the kitchen and just started cooking, or we went in the garden and started doing gardening, or my kid decided they were really interested in something, so we went online and we started doing research together, or we made Lego stuff all afternoon, or the kids decided they wanted to do a video. And it's been really exciting because it's been this kind of seeing people have got a little insight in this kind of dark cloud of possibilities. And one of the things that people have started talking about in Germany as well is this idea of a free Friday. So, and I think this is so wonderful, that maybe you'd have your school from Monday to Thursday, and this is just the system, we cannot change it. But what if on a Friday we said teachers didn't follow curriculum? Teachers and kids, most importantly, didn't follow curriculum, but kids could maybe set the agenda. Teachers and kids together could say, hey, what have we been doing recently that you might find interesting to develop a little bit more? The system in Germany is very marks oriented. We motivate a lot through marks. My daughter, she went to school a year early because she was just ready to go to school and we didn't want to keep her behind another year. But that had kind of all kinds of follow-on things. And last year, she's German and English because I'm English, my husband's German. And a couple of years ago, she said, actually, what I'd really like to do is go abroad for a year and spend a year out and go to the UK, to school in the UK, explore my English roots, have a break, if you like, before I go and do my equivalent of high school diploma, I think it is, and have a break. And she's come back from this year. She was at boarding school. And she's come back, and all I can say is, wow, I have a different daughter. She was one of these, she was one of these mid-level kids who was kind of nicely in the middle, one or two subjects that she was kind of good at, but she was struggling in many ways with many things because she didn't see why she had to learn things and all the rest. And she came back from an environment where she was given so much positive encouragement to follow her own ideas. And most importantly, in this year, she was doing A-levels, so English A-levels, and she chose 3 subjects that she was interested in. And she started off with biology and she couldn't get to terms with it. And then she said, hey, you know what, Mom, I'm not really into the biology. It's not my thing. Can I change? And we said, sure, you choose what you want. and she found psychology. And suddenly she's just exploded. She's blossomed. She reads psychology now for fun because it's interesting. And it's like, it's been a really, really moving experience, because I see my daughter and I think, this is so wonderful. She was given charge. She was allowed to take charge. And by taking charge, she's grown as a person. She's become much stronger. And I think, Sophie, your daughter sounds incredibly strong. The way that she's gone through this whole process, wow, I am massively impressed. So for me, I'm coming from a very different angle, but I'm really convinced. Also, having read Sir Ken Robinson, I love him. I think his ideas are so incredibly put. And this has just all made me think we need to start changing what we can. We can't maybe change the whole thing, but let's start where we can change and start doing small steps, because small steps are better than big steps. And because I've seen how it's affected my daughter. So yeah, that's where I'm from.
Thank you, Louise. And I will, just a couple of things that I'd like to sort of direct response to you. It was illegal at some point in most states in the US. And so if you're not aware of that sort of progression, is that there was an educator named John Holt. So I've read everything John Holt is like, chills talking about him. He is the person who coined the term unschooling. And he, if you have babies, you start with how they learn, I think it's called, and how children learn. And then otherwise, there's another one that I could recommend. And I want to create resources in the community for people who might be interested. But he wound up leaving, and basically what he did was created a newsletter at that time that allowed people to not feel as lonely as Sophie said she felt. And then they started together to like share information about the legal, they were doing like, they dismantled it, right? And it became why the homeschooling sort of, there's a stronghold in our country, luckily, because there's some people who think that's a problem, but that's because they fought very hard for these rights because of all the reasons why we're saying. And so I will say that I do believe that it could happen there like that too, where it's like, you just have to have people realize that they can create a movement and that they can make that change, and they can look at what Holt did, and Holt's organization, Pat Ferenga, is still running his organization, and Pat Ferenga is accessible. I'm not saying, he's going to talk to everybody, but if I were to do a podcast that had this kind of stuff, it would be talking to people like him and saying, I talked to someone like Louise, what would you recommend that people in Germany do to try and make this happen? And so that was one thing. And then the Free Fridays, there's a Genius Hour type term. If you look for that term, you might find some people talking about Genius Hour, where even you could start with an hour, but don't stop at an hour, go for a day. I love that concept. And then, kids can set the agenda. Was an Agile Learning Center is a place where, when I just went direct response, I'm telling you, so like if at all during the rest of this meeting, you have something that you want to kind of stop me in my tracks and say, I don't understand what you're saying. We, in our community, in an ALC community, we just send a signal like this, and it's a loud, quiet signal that says, I'm lost. I have a clarifying question. You should prioritize me over the continuing talking you're doing, because I don't understand and I need to understand to follow along. It's a very powerful symbol to just, because it's not drawing this huge attention that no kid's going to do this. So this is even something like things like that teachers can implement to say, it's a little bit like, I know that Johnny's hand is always like really right down here, but he's sending me the little signal that I need a clarifying question. So things like that, there's lots of things you can do is what I would encourage you. And so yes, thank you. And last but definitely not least, we're going to hear from Cassandra.
It's so wonderful to hear each of your stories. It's like I'll just dive into mine. So I'm I was laid off back in mid-March from my position as a nature-based early childhood educator. And but so that's my like present story, but I'm just going to jump back to 13-year-old me. And I went to 1 week of high school, 1 week of public high school. And then, well, I'll jump back further. So my older brother, he went to 2 years of high school and then did not want to continue high school and went to our local community college, as well as kind of pieced together an education for himself for his last 2 years of high school. And so there was a pathway. I decided after 1 week of high school that I didn't want to go. And so that was like, early August. And then I decided I wasn't going back. I told my mom. I remember I was so heartbroken that it didn't work, but I was in bed with my mom like that Sunday night before the second week of high school. I was like, I'm not going back. I'm not doing this. And I told her there, I was like, I could imagine myself 4 years later hating learning. And I was, Sophie, sounds like kind of similar to your daughter, where I loved learning. I got really good grades all through elementary, middle school, and which loving learning and getting good grades are completely different things. So I was a very good student, and I also really loved learning. And so I was a very, I think I was a very good student for teachers to have, because I had that curiosity and I knew what they wanted to meet the requirements, as well as I was curious. And so and I intentionally wanted to go to public high school because I was in a private independent school, K-8. And I was like, no, I'm not doing this. This is literally just going to kill all of my learning capacity, and I can't do this. And my parents were already open. They thought I would last a little bit longer, but they were open to it, and they're very open to it. And so I grew up in the state of California, and they had a friend who they met through, for my brother's needs. And he was able to kind of be my principal, if you will, until I got my high school, until I took the high school proficiency exam, which is equivalent to the GED if you're under 18. So I took that exam. I remember distinctly, I was in a room with all sorts of really interesting people who also needed their high school proficiency exam. And the exam was incredibly easy for me personally, incredibly kind of, basic foundational material that I thought was surprising, that this is what you need to be able to graduate high school. So in any case, I did that. And then I went to community college for 4 years. And so in a sense, I took community college classes in, replacement for high school. And I loved it. It was so challenging for me. I was in rooms, with like all ages in community college. And I really struggled with having friends who were my own age, and met a few people, who were also doing kind of similar somethings to me. But that was like one or two. But I really got along much better with the people who were a lot older than me and who just had interesting stories and that brought them there, moms returning to school. And I had a lot of moms returning to school friends. I was really involved in theater. Like I was just able to pursue my interests, and really into filmmaking, and, and ended up getting my associate's degree in French, though sadly I'm not fluent any longer because I haven't practiced it. But nonetheless, I didn't know what unschooling was. That wasn't a thing in my world, but it really was like self-directed learning is what I was doing. And having the structure of classes, I think, was really valuable for me. I mean, Sophie, like hearing your daughter, I was like, I don't know. I had really high levels of anxiety and also just, having that outside structure, I think was really, really valuable to me. Then again, and jumping to me now being an educator myself, like I kind of always had dreams of being a teacher, but I think it's like in every role I'm subversively telling the children to think for themselves. Like that's kind of what I feel like I'm there for, and reminding myself that I'm not the one who knows all. And it's made it so I haven't really worked well in a lot of different learning environments as the educator now. So, but kind of nature-based learning, and specifically fully, my program was fully outdoors, 3.5 hours daily, Monday through Friday. And not being in the walls of a classroom really helps a lot with actually it being genuine learning and genuine child-led learning. And also being in preschool, being ages 3 to 6 helps a lot, because there's developmentally appropriate practice that states that play is the way that learning happens. I don't think that's anything different for older children or adults. Like it's kind of ridiculous that it's like, oh, okay, we'll just section it off to younger children. But and even so, there's a ton of preschool programs that are teacher-led, academically focused, it's ludicrous. It's setting children up for failure, as a human. It's really it's not even just ludicrous, it's harmful. It's really harmful to young children. And I think that, in a way I stepped into working with young children because I really wanted to help them before they got fucked over. Like help them before this, before this like massive sense of like judgment of self occurred for me, in terms of, grades being, grades or marks, as you're saying, Louise, being the defining feature. Like every low grade I got, and low by my standards was like anything less than an A, was made me feel horrible. Mm-hmm. Like that shouldn't happen, especially for children. That shouldn't happen. And so I'm in the process of like undoing a lot of that right now, of like undoing this need for approval, this need for the teacher to like me. That's basically what it is. It's like this need for me to say something or do something for the teacher to approve of. And I wasn't born that way. Like I know for a fact I was not born that way. It was conditioned into me, in large part because of school. And so yeah, I mean, that's kind of my response, as well as a little bit of my story to the three of you. And I'm thankful that I jumped into the ship, because it's really, I care a lot about it. And because I don't see anything, it's such a defining feature of my life. And, and also young children, like whatever type of school they're in, that's where they're spending a really good portion of their young lives. And so, and in the nature-based learning world, there is so much cool stuff happening. It's so awesome. And I think some of it is really like overt unschooling, to kind of use the term, since that's a defining feature of why we're here and talking. And some of it is like what I'm talking about, of kind of just being this like covert kind of having nature be our teacher, right? Because that's really that really feels so much more genuine and authentic as a way of learning with nature. So
it's funny that you're saying that, Cassandra, which really reminds me. So my daughter was put is really the term, parked in a French school, because I'm French and I live in California as well, in LA. And she was put in the French lycée, which don't even get me started there. But I remember going to the art room and all the dolphins they had drawn were gray and all the waters were blue and the kids were 3. And that should have been a hit. Like, who told them that that's how it is, and who told them not to do rainbow anything at that age, right? But I did do it because my parents were super pressuring me that at least if I live somewhere else, she has to speak the language, blah, blah, bullshit. Great. And then one day I went to a parents' conference type thing, and there's a French expression for those of you who speak French, but avoir un poil dans la main is like having a hair in your hand. And the teacher said, she was three. She said, it's not like she has a hair, she has a tree. She's that lazy. She has a tree in her hand. And I was like, she's fucking 3 years old. Like, I don't know what you're doing, but for her not to engage with you, you really have to try hard, because at a 3-year-old, like, you know, she was all going home for everything. But when I went to discuss, so I took her out. And I went to see the director because we had paid for the whole year, and it was like 3 weeks into the school. And I said, I want my money back. Like, this is bad customer service. And he said, this is what he said. He said, oh, I told her she shouldn't speak like that to parents. And I said, oh, your problem is not that she does that shit. The problem is that she actually told me. And so I was a journalist at the time, and I basically threatened him to, like, you know, pursue some sort of like French community revolution of sorts, perfectly suited for almost 4th of July, 14th for us. But anyway, I took her out. But the point was, I took her to a school that you may all know of, because one, it's a flagship of what this is, and also because it's copied on Somerville, which was in England, which was created by Carl Rogers and this whole movement. And the school in LA is called Play Mountain Place. And the very first day she walked in, I will never forget that. So it was middle of the year, you know, whatever, November, when we did it. And so find a school in LA, you know, that would take your kid, you know, already anytime is a problem at the beginning of the year, but mid-year even more. And so we walked into Play Mountain Place, which was all about welcoming, and all of it was outside. All of it was outside. The school was a tree. There was a giant tree in the middle, and all of it was about building things and jumping things and sharing. And it was based on RIE. Are you familiar with resource?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Nicole, if you're not, I mean, any of you is not familiar with it, you should check it out. But Resource Infant Educating, we should have a link to their work. It's based on Emmy Pickler work in Hungary after the war, when all the men had died and all the women were basically sent to work. And so all these children, you know, it was a bunch of, you know, orphanage really. And she created this model of communication, which is incredible. My daughter did that when she was little. Anyway, Play Mountain, we walk in, she's wearing a salamander on her shirt. And this kid comes over and says, that's a salamander. And, you know, they're all 4, whatever they are, you know. And my daughter says, yeah. And he goes, let's go find one. And the two of them like run in the field, and the teacher pulls up a book, and it's about salamanders, and they chat, and they all learned about salamander that day. And I was just like, like air. So I sorry I jumped in, but I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, your
that because
is what lights me up. And it's sad that's not more welcome with older children. I think that I feel and my approaches and, you know, my philosophy of learning is very naturally welcomed in nature-based early learning. And at the same time, I'm, you know, I love to connect with all other facets of learning. Like, I'm not, you know, I'm kind of having an aha moment right now, because there's a lot of folks I work with, a lot of my colleagues who are, you know, they've always been really interested in outdoor education, environmental ed. science-based learning, like it's really the science that brought them in. But for me with nature-based learning, it's because it just seems authentic. It's like this, and it can be about, about nature, or it can just be in nature, and it can be, moving our body in nature and having, a very visceral experience with our sensations. It can be making art. It can be like whatever it is, we can be more human and more ourselves as educators as well as children. Because I've had plenty of teaching positions too, where, and it seems like Louise, might be where your path has led, where it's like, and to use just the coined term, like I've just felt this huge sense of burnout and this like lack of enthusiasm, lack of creativity as an educator. And I'm like, I can't do this to myself. And because again, I'm going to lose that sense of, that passion for learning. And it's like, and if an educator has lost that, how on earth are they going to share that with the child? And so, and I think I do come, and now I'm remembering, about the unschooling movement, and that really that the energy and enthusiasm is allowed to come from the child much more directly, I guess. But I'm still very much in the model of there's an educator and then there's children, or there's students. But I welcome both models. And also to just kind of to have a little dovetail into the podcast theme that I'm really wanting to pursue is about change, and is about that process of change, and how do we actually go through and navigate a change. And so like so the change could be, how does a parent shift from, a traditional in-school model to unschooling? How do they shift into this process? Because I think it's in that, like, it's in the struggle for changing that really, like, I guess revealing that struggle, I think could really help a lot of people, because it is really isolating. And yet at the same time, like, if there were more examples of how to do it, and also that it's not super easy, like Sophie, hearing your story, like, it's not easy. This is not an easy shift to do. But I think that there are a lot of people who see the struggle their children are facing and don't know what to do. Like, they see that their children who are depressed at an age they, should not even experience depression. I mean, I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but especially not children. They see their children with like high anxiety levels, self-harming, like you were saying, and they just don't know what to do. And I think it is kind of a lack of creativity on the parents' part. But at the same time, like, then we also have the reality of just like a lack of community for parents in general, and a lack of neighborhoods. Like, we don't have, distinct neighborhoods in lots of communities in the United States, at least. So it's like, so where are they getting their support? And so it really is on the individual to act. And I will do that. Sophie will do that. I mean, all four of us will do that and have done that. How do we get more people to do that? Like, how do we invite more people to say, like, welcome to this? It is going to be hard. It is going to be hard, and it's worth it. I think that's really, and it's entirely, you're going to see, you're going to feel the effects, and it's going to be worth it for you, your family, your children, your group of students, however your model is, like, whatever the shift is, if it's into more nature-based learning, and by nature-based learning, I really mean nature-based play. Like, if it's shift into unschooling, like, I just want to see more of those shifts happening is really what I and they can be called different things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's the underlying like philosophy and belief that, you know, that learning is welcome, that curiosity is welcome, that wonder is welcome. So
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
All right. So here's what I want to say. I have a lot to say, but I'm going to try and save a lot of it for the resource links that we'll do. But just to kind of clarify the way I see it, and other people see things differently. The difference that I see in unschooling, that term, versus self-directed education is that unschooling is a whole life philosophy. People who, it's usually a home-based, and I'm sure Sophie could go on about how, as her daughter started, you see it as something that the child is doing to some extent, or the parents enabling the child. But what Cassandra is saying is the shift that has to happen is that Sophie also had to unschool. And in order to really go in that direction, there's a process at first that's called deschooling, where we do not even realize how much the way in which we were indoctrinated to think and function in the world, asking for permission, waiting our turn, all of those things came from what we were learning more when they thought they were teaching us math and science and English, right? So these are the lifelong lessons that stayed with us. And in order to really operate in the current world and the world we're moving into and be creative, you have to dismantle perfectionism and all of those things that pining for grades is actually what built that in you, as a rooted it and dug the roots deep in, and it has to be unrooted, and that's deschooling. And
just
and I
for
will
reference, Nicole, can I interrupt for 2 seconds? They say some of the research I'd done at the time, they say it takes about a month per year the kid has gone to school to detox.
Wow.
Yes.
And so if your kid has gone to school for 10 years, let's say, it could take up to a year to like let them come back to where they would learn from their self-motivation, as opposed to, you know, pleasing this bigger adult thing around. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And so I just like to say that I love, and I'm not exactly sure that I remember exactly how Cassandra, you know, phrased it so eloquently, but it was that how do we help more people embrace the shift and I will say that, you know, another part of my journey was that in 2018, at the end of that master's, I had taken an intro to online teaching class where I had to create an actual really, you know, a curriculum for a class, because I'd never been that type of educator. I see myself, you have to embrace Cassandra. The facilitator is what you are. You're a facilitator of learning. You are not the person you're helping pull it out of them and creating the space for them to learn themselves. And so, so it was a hard class for me to try and do it in my self-directed way and unschoolish way. And originally I was going to do it on creativity. That was going to be the topic of the content. And I was at the conference, the Aero conference. Aero might be, it's coming, well, it might have just passed. They were doing their first conference, was going to be online. And I used to go to their conference. And I was there, and there were two 15-year-olds who were facilitating a hour-and-a-half session, about 40 adults in the room. And the topic was teens talk about basically trust in a Sudbury school. And the Sudbury schools are the ones also in the US. The one in Massachusetts is the first Sudbury school in the States, and it is modeled also after Summerhill. And so they were brilliant. They have a video, I'll put it out there. They did an interview of me because they have a podcast back in 2018, and I was awful on that podcast. They were they were bouncing off. They have another one where they interviewed 2 keynote speakers, and they were brilliant because they did more research on them. And those are better speakers than I was at the time. So, but I listened to what they were saying. And afterwards, I just went up to like one of their parents was there, and I said, so are you telling me that there are people who choose to send their kids to this school and then they come in and they're sabotaging everything? They're like, and she's like, oh yeah. And I'm like, okay, we have a parent problem here. Like you have chosen this because you want the alternative, but these parents need to deschool and somebody needs to help them through that process. And I believe it is more through the stories. It's not through links and links and links on the internet. It has to be through hearing what Sophie went through, or, even Cassandra, how you chose, what it was like for you at that time. So that is what we are. If we want to make change, then it has to be that we're trying to help parents make that shift. And we're also having to help educate, Louise, or give Louise resources so that she can connect to other people in a country like Germany that doesn't even allow homeschooling, let alone unschooling. And yet there are ways that can come into your schools too. So like Canada, there's a group in Canada, the website's not even up yet, and it's called Unschooling School, I think .ca, and they are trying to actually and joining, like, I'm pretty sure it's like very inexpensive to join, like Arrow, which is the alternative education resource organization, and then the Alliance for Self-Directed Education is, I believe, I'll put the links, and they share.
eTusk? Do you know eTusk?
eTusk?
ETUSC.
No.
Stands for, I'll find it. My daughter has become a counselor there. It's a camp that occurs exclusively for unschoolers. And it is the gathering of the most interesting humans I've ever been around, let alone young people.
Yes.
They all are different for different reasons. Some of them have, learning challenges. Some of them were just too creative and could not sit on a chair for too long. Some of them supposedly are ADD. I just think they're bored.
Yes, I do too. But
and all of that. So, but eTusk is cool because I remember when, first of all, among them, because Leah was alone a lot when she was doing what she was doing here. And so just to be among themselves was incredible. The creativity was off the chart. I mean, every day was, and some of it was, challenging because they also don't have the usual maturity sometimes to stay with something, that school does teach you, even if it's hammered into your head. But there is something to, sometimes you need to learn a skill to be good at something, my premise is that if you're interested in the learning of something, it actually becomes more natural than if it's forced. But there was something to watching these kids, draw a dot on a sheet and think they're geniuses. And that's tricky too, to go to bounce the other side of the spectrum where, it becomes some family confused, allowing the child to become, or providing an environment where the child thrives, and also making them think that they're geniuses because they, drop the eggs in the kitchen. There's a line for me there, which was interesting to walk.
I was called a genius a lot, and I hated it. And it was like, it also messed with me. It really kind of, it did a number on me because I was like, well, I am really intelligent and I know how to work the system, right? Like I know how to do things that teachers or authorities want me to do. But does that make one a genius? And I know how to get into community college and, take these classes, and again, does that make one a genius?
It's also, who cares? It's like, who needs to put you in a box of either the learning disability range, who the fuck cares? Some kids are meant to be, I'm sure you all know the Sir Ken Robinson has this story with Bert, the husband of Nadia Comaneci. Do you know that story? So he's 2 years old. He's the man who's brought more gold medals to America than any human has ever brought to any country, really. I think he's got that 8 gold medals in he's a gymnast. And so the story goes that when he's 2, he starts walking on his hands everywhere. And the mother is like, why are you doing that? And the kid's like, I don't know, it feels more comfortable to be on my hands. And he's everywhere. He goes upstairs on his hands. He's a fucking gymnast, you know, to be in the making, you know. And when Sir Ken tells the story, he's the cutest thing. He's like, in my house, that would have been like, you know, my mother would have been like, get, you know, stop with that. Just walk on your feet like everybody else, you know. But this kid was really supported by this mother who saw, I mean, if one believes that we're meant for something and we have destinies of sorts, you know, Einstein probably have a different brain than Bert, who has a different body. And it's, you know, it's meant that the job here for me has been to support, like, the 4 stories we have here is exactly what we're talking about. Different stories. You don't have one pair of shoes for everybody, you know. That doesn't work. We all have different size, different brains, different thoughts, different desires, different backgrounds, different, you know, access. Like, would I have done what I did if I was, you know, a receptionist in you know, I don't know, in the middle of nowhere? Maybe not, because I wouldn't have had as much. Like, my daughter had access to spend a month with a psychologist and study with them, and she spent a month with a photographer and studied with them. It's like that enriched the experience in a really huge way. But would I say, like, I'm not a, you know, unschooling for everyone. I don't see that. Like, if you're a super freaky control person, don't do it. Like, don't do it, because part of the work is really to let go and trust them. That's what she says now. She says that what I did for her the most of everything I did was to give her, I had faith in her. I had, like, everybody would look at her and be like, oh my God, you've been in bed watching Friends, you know, on TV for a week. And well, it turns out she's probably a TV writer. That's probably where she's going to end. And it's like, so do I freak out that she's not studying math every day? Well, I don't know. If you're not going to use math in your career, who the fuck cares? You know, it's like, if you're going to be an astronaut, you know, probably you want to study a little math. But if you want to be an astronaut, you will, because it's the, right? It's the part that you have to do. But if you don't have to do it, it's like, I don't want to study trigonometry all day. That's not my shtick, you know? So to ask someone to do that for 8 hours a day, that's a pretty strong punishment, I think.
And also,
you know, 5 days a week.
And also sitting down. I think this is what was so cool, what you were saying, Cassandra, was about the being outside in your nature schools. And I just wanted to say, this is one really interesting development in Germany, that we have this Scandinavian system of lots of parents. It's becoming more of a movement, sending their kids to forest kindergarten. When my kid was little, we didn't have that around where I was. But if I had the chance now, she would be there, because they're out in all weathers. They're out in the trees. They're out doing stuff with the forest, learning about what deer have been around and all these kind of things. And this is what it's about. They're not sitting down or enclosed in a box, but they're out in nature and learning from and following their interests and all the rest. And I think this is, it's kind of, for me, one of the key things too. It's about, I'm sure that your daughter, you say that she might have spent the day in bed, but I'm sure she didn't just sit at her desk or sit down all day and not move. She could move because she followed what her body was telling her. And it's a tiny thing, but I think things like this are so important, that we just help kids to just be like they can be in things like this.
They also speak in the movement, I heard a lot, this idea that because they were forced to do, you know, the ring bells, okay, we go to food now, the ring bells, we have geography now, you know, all that stuff that they have to follow. When they are given a chance to do what they want, they will do. Like, what would you do if you were given a chance to do anything you wanted, you know, and you've been in prison for, you know, 10 years, you probably will stay in bed and watch TV for 5 minutes, but it passes. That's what was really impressive to watch in her particularly, is that at first there was these desires to just be like, I just want to do the fuck I want. I want to get up when I want to get up, and I want to go to bed when I want to go to bed. And I just want to, and if you trust them, they will find their natural rhythm, where she started to want to get up earlier and she started to want to go find what was interesting to her. But you have to be in that ground. That's why I love, Nicole, when you speak of like the parents are really the ones who need help. The children don't have problems. They have problems because they have to follow this crazy system. But the parents really is where I did most of when I was involved, you know, heavily when she was, you know, doing it, which now, because it's behind me, I'm a little less involved, still fascinated, as you can see. But it was really the parents that needed, like, they would come to me and they'd be like, how do you do it? And I would explain, and then they'd be like, I'm too controlling, I can't do it. It's like, okay, well, you know, or I don't have the time. It's like, it's not a matter of time. It's really not, I mean, if they're 3, you have to be with them because for safety, if nothing else, you know. But if your kid, I mean, she started traveling when she was 14. She went to England and studied theater, you know, with the money, a third of the money I was spending on the school she was going to. I gave her a budget and she went and she studied, you know, she followed the lines of the Shakespearean. It was like shit that, you know, her essay was more interesting than, you know, I sat in a class and studied geography.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think that what you're sharing is making me thinking of, has me thinking of is what is success? Like what is that? And in the many like parent teacher conferences I've had, I think that's the underlying issue, and maybe that's how like control fits into a lot of things, because if a parent has their definition of what success looks like, then there really isn't a way forward. And what is really a marker of somebody who's able to step into a nature-based learning program. It's like they're having to step away from the path that supposedly leads to success, because there's this assumption that an indoor preschool will lead to success in an indoor public school, K through 8, you know, right? And it's like, to take that step out and be like, no, like this nature-based learning could really offer you and your child boundless creativity, boundless, you know, talking about being outside in all weather, like resilience like no other. And it's like, those are the skills I want in any future children I have. Those are the skills I want in future adults. Like it's not following the rules. I don't want that. I don't want being scared of the weather. Like, if anything, in our time with our climate crisis, we need people who are not scared of the weather and shifts and weather changes. But I think I'm, you know, speaking to folks who you all understand this, but I think that is the main root question, is what is success?
And sorry, Nicole, I feel like I interrupted you earlier and you were kind of on a roll, but
I am facilitating here and making the space, and I will say that because I have studied this, I have the first thing that people, when I designed that curriculum, the first thing was that they had to say, what is your definition of success? Because you have to have, it is exactly, so you and I are totally on the same page, and it's because the world has a standard. There's just like there's one sort of expectation on what beauty looks like, and gender, and all of these things. There is an expectation of what success looks like. And then I had it where, if you haven't seen I'm Fine, Thanks, there's a documentary called I'm Fine, Thanks. It costs like $5 to like pay the independent filmmaker who made it, and it is phenomenal. And it is talking about the stories of people like us, our age, all ages, not kids, but us, who decided to kind of, you know, reject the American dream and do their own thing, and the way in which how people were handled them. So it is when you break from the status quo, people notice. And there was a guy in there who his quote is, you know, it's something like, I'm paraphrasing, if you want to lose friends, go do epic shit, because people will be right away, they will be telling you, it makes them so uncomfortable, because they're like, if you can do that, then what does it say about me?
What am I doing?
Exactly. What does it say about me that I can't do it? And so I hear what like Sophie keeps saying about the person who has like that strong control sort of thing. And like, the world is not a place you can control anymore. Like things used to be small and you could control your world. So I say, if you have that challenge, like your life and your kids' lives will be better if you work on that. And there's, that's where people that help, and I forgot who said helping with change, Cassandra, right? Because my study, it was called Creativity and Change Leadership. It is about, how do you help organizations, individuals change? And it starts with clarifying what they actually want, like what they believe and thinking for themselves, instead of and questioning how, the stories they bought, right? We're talking about stories here that we're sharing, but everyone's bought stories that create the world that they're operating in, and the way their worldview is just a compilation of stories that they bought into in the past. And you don't have to be, I know it's pretty sure it's Seth who's saying changing your mind is making a new decision. It's not saying you were wrong before. You don't have to live in the past and be like, let's have guilt and all these feelings about how I used to be. It's like, I see better. If I see better, I can do better. And I can make a new decision every day to go forward in a different way. And that's like, obviously the world, this crisis has made people open, because now they know that everything they thought was so taken for granted and boxy, exactly, like everything is gone. And like the people that, the unschoolers, the people from Akimbo, like we're thriving because you can see opportunity everywhere. Once you have that as eyes to see opportunity, it's like, yeah, I got let go of my job, but I joined the podcasting. And then now you're not even a week in, Cassandra. And like, that's for me. When I joined at just the end of February, I was so grateful for this community during the pandemic. It was, you can't even imagine, the connection that went on around how everybody was first handling and how they were getting let go of their jobs and what are they going to do. And do you see, like, people who stayed tethered to the community really just, instead of pulling away, got a lot out of it. So I showed up every day. I recommend that you check in every day. It's like, even if you can only spend a few minutes, just, yeah. So you did not cut me off, but thank you for giving me another opportunity to share. So
I would love to see if there is, because I'm actually on a podcast in 10 minutes.
Yes,
I have to go. But what do we want to do? Like, do we want to?
So I will tell you this. So I'm kind of sneaky. I've recorded this. You will learn that when you record using Zoom, you can create it where each person has their own track. So I will load the video up for everyone else to share, but I will find a way to make it that each of you will have the audio tracks, so that you may decide you want to do something with these great conversations that we had, because that's how we would make change in the world, is by sharing the stories. So we all have, if we give each other free access to use whatever parts of this,
100%, 100% for me.
Then I look forward to seeing what comes of that. And
do we want to meet again? Do we want to?
Well, and that's what I was going to say, is that I actually do think I'd like for us to talk again, but I also want to create space for other people. And so while this one was recorded, and like I said, you will be learning next week how to do this stuff. I think it worked really well with 4 people. You can use breakout rooms in Zoom if people don't know about that, but you can't record all breakout rooms. So if people wanted to do something similar and create their own conversations like this and record them and share the audio, I think I'd love to see more podcasts where this is kind of, you're not just answering and feeling forced by those questions. It's more a collaborative effort to pull out, because the magic was, we were all responding to each other and not just a set of canned questions.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot more will come of it. And I will say that one of the things about discourse is that it can become so overwhelming, but it's such a powerful learning platform that you just got to think about how you organize things. So we have that great learning experiences thread, but I'm going to pull this into an own thread. And then I believe that there can be a lot of other threads that come off of it, so that, whether it's like a resources page for, maybe Cassandra, as she's doing stuff, she might put together a resources page for nature-based learning, so that the educators and parents in pod 6 can learn a lot through the efforts of the group that is formed out of that
I'm
learning.
happy to do one too. I'm happy to do the resource of, wherever I found when I was looking, for sure.
Yeah, so I think I'll check with like Alex and the team and find out, like, I think that it would probably stay in the mastermind thread, because that's where you find everybody. And these topics, people are going to be, but yeah.
Maybe we put one in the general section too, like we just put one with maybe the link, and we just say there's a group that's forming that's interested in this, and then we see what people do, because there might be podcasts out there already from some of us that we could start making this a little more, just public.
So yeah, Sophie, if you don't mind doing the general one, then what you feel like needs to be connected.
Shall I wait for your link? Shall I wait so your link is posted and then I'll grab that, or shall I not post it with the link?
I guess, once you see my link and what's been out there. Because the reason why Cassandra's here is because I told her about the learning community thread or the one about amplifying.
Yeah, that's why if we put one in general, I feel like some people that are, maybe we call it, alternative to traditional schooling or whatever, and we see what people grab,
Yep. Sounds good.
This was super fun. I've got to go.
Bye.
Bye, guys. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Hold on. You don't all have to go, but bye. I'm going to stop recording for at least because